So today is the 16th of November 2011 and I'm sitting here in Sydney with four of the directors of First Draft. They are Dara Gill, Julie Burke, Georgie Meagher and Connolly. That's four of the 8 directors. So first question really is a very basic question. What is First Draft?
Well, First Draft is an artist-run initiative. An ARI is what we sort of term ourselves in the context of Sydney and Australia. We've been running for 25 years now with a rotating board of 8 directors. We have a focus on emerging artists and experimental practices, and we run a gallery program in Surry Hills in the centre of the city, and also we have a studio complex, a building with 8 studios, a printing press, a reading room and some offices. And from those 2 spaces, we run a number of programs for writers, curators and artists in Sydney.
Thanks, Georgie. And one of the things that you missed out there, which is of course the reason that I'm here, is that all 8 of you are practising artists.
Yes.
And is that then written into the Constitution that the directors of First Draft must always be artists?
Yes. It was started by 4 practising artists in 1986, and ever since then there have been a large part of actually the artist community in Sydney has been involved in First Draft in some way, and always run by artists.
Having said that, I don't think us as an ARI or nationally as ARIs were as strict as being what one might term as an artist as opposed to a curator, writer, arts worker. We're not as exclusionary as I think we may have been as ARIs 10 years ago about what we call being an artist.
The term is
Race,
kind of, the term itself in terms of modern Australian, the scene, the term ARI is kind of being appropriated in many different directions. So, yeah, it's not, I guess artist-run initiative is not maybe the best word anymore.
So, have you thought of a different word? Or?
No, but I would say, well, even non-institutional, that doesn't really work either, because I'd like to think it's First Draft as an institution.
No, it still works. I think it just represents the fact that the idea of artist is expanding.
Yeah.
What constitutes an artist generally in culture.
And speaks more to a community of what we include as an artist community now.
So how does it operate? I mean, what are the mechanisms? It's quite a big organisation. You outlined, Georgie, there quite a few different things that First Draft does, and it also manages buildings, and the directors are only coming in for a period of 2 years. How do you negotiate, I mean, to any of you, how do you negotiate that thing daily? How is the machine got up and running?
I forgot to mention that we actually have just taken on our first member of staff this year, who started out as a studio manager when we got residents of our new building in Woolloomooloo, which was only last year. But otherwise, we have a rotating board, so there's 4 directors that change over every year. So there's a process of handing over of knowledge that's embedded in the organisational structure, and that I think that is something that will likely never change about First Draft, because that's something that's really been cited as a reason for its longevity, because the ephemeral nature of artist-run initiatives is about burnout and about having so much to do, and that is sort of a strategy of being able to not have to reinvent the wheel constantly, but also be able to make a mark over 2 years and hand over that knowledge to another group of artists, potentially a younger contingency.
So you're in it for your 2-year period, and 4 of you come in, and 4 of you are already in your 2nd year, and that's always how it's worked.
Yeah.
And then over the course of the year, how do you rate? Do you all meet all the time? I mean, how does that work?
We're supposed to meet weekly, which...
We do meet weekly.
We do meet weekly, but I think maybe this year we've only probably had 3 meetings where every single director is there. You know, there's the nature of the organisation. We're all volunteers. This is something that we do as well as many things. So yeah, weekly meetings, but I think most of our real communication gets done through email, which I really wonder how First Draft existed before something like that. The 80s, God, that would have been weird. I think it was a little more radical then as well. There were, you know.
They had less to manage, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of started. It started out as being a place for female artists because there was a lack of female representation in galleries and whatnot. But I think it's kind of changed its tact once.
It was never exclusive. It never defined itself on those terms. But that's where a lot of the early shows were based around that feminist, with the feminist agenda. But in saying that we meet every week, we have our exhibition program runs. We have new shows every 3 weeks. So essentially, we have 2 meetings and then an opening of an exhibition. And so that's sort of
the turnover is vast here. I've been kind of struggling to get my head round that. You're doing quite a lot, and you're just meeting once, every week, but not everyone necessarily there all the time. So how is everything staffed and structured? You've got this one member of staff that is an administrator, and then the galleries are serviced by volunteers. Is that correct?
They only sit and mind the gallery during opening hours. The rest of it is done by the directors.
Uh-huh. So the installing of the show
is artist responsibility.
Uh-huh.
And so, but technical requirements like televisions, we don't really let them do that because they're expensive. So a director normally does that. The director does the lights as well for the same reason, because it's expensive, sensitive equipment. But yeah, it's pretty... We try to implore on all of our artists an idea of self-sufficiency. Some artists are more needy than others. That we attempt to... We give you the space and whatever else comes with that, and they sort of make it their own.
Yeah, it's pretty... We're quite hands-off in terms of any curatorial kind of prerogative, apart from programming the space, which happens by application twice a year. And in terms of managing each show, it's essentially each exhibition has a director or 2 directors assigned to it, and they're the main point of contact for the exhibiting artists. And so things like technical requirements and invitations, and if there are any performances or anything happening on opening night that needs to be organised, it's just sort of a rotating thing with different directors taking the lead on different projects and different exhibitions.
And how are those curatorial decisions made? So people apply in twice yearly blocks, and you sit together as a board of directors, and how are those decisions about what work is selected made? We
all sit together and we all read all the applications together, and then we
discuss.
Score them. We score them based on whether we personally thought they were great, and then at the end
and if they fit into our constitution of being either emerging or experimental.
And then the scores are tabulated, and the top however many we have room for get a show.
And have any of you ever exhibited in First Draft?
I have.
Yes.
Have you as well? Yeah.
I haven't.
Georgie hasn't.
I have as well.
So Georgie, you're the only one here out of these 4 that hasn't. And that's interesting. So for 3 of you, so Julie, you were an artist that was showing here.
Yeah, I was also a studio resident as well. So I was part of the residency program and then had a show.
Was that before you moved to Sydney? Was that as a Melbourne artist?
No, it was a Sydney artist.
How long ago was that?
2007.
Oh.
Yeah. Before the redo.
Didn't know that.
So there is a track from being an artist that is exhibited to becoming a director, and at least in this showing, it's kind of 3/4 of you, which is also an interesting
Well, for me, it was I had my show in August, and then by December of last year, I was a director. And I think Kat hadn't had a show, but she became a director.
But I applied before.
She already had.
I got my show before I applied for directorship.
But you were a director when you had your show?
In this case, yes, I was.
That's interesting. So that was actually my next question, is around curating your own work within. But you're shaking your head, so that's a no-no.
Yeah.
Bad.
Yeah, it's not looked upon favorably.
Yeah, but in Kat's case, she had already been given a show, and then the call out for the directors happened after she had been notified, and she decided to apply to be a director. But once the directors finish, they within a 2-year period are offered a free show after their directorship. So
that's
as like a thank
payment.
you. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So all directors are offered a solo show for 3 weeks after their directorship as a kind of payment for their... That's so interesting. So that's... that...
Is that
it's $900 worth of value.
Is that common in your experience? Or?
Well, it's very uncommon. I'm really looking for examples of where... Because in the performing arts, it's very common for the artistic director, say, to... I mean, here in Sydney, you've got Sydney Theatre Company, where the artistic director is Kate Blanchett, and she's also picking works that she then stars in, or that her husband might direct. And it's seen in the performing arts, conventional performing arts world, as very normal. But it's almost unheard of for, say, the director of an art gallery to program their own work. I mean, I can't think of any examples.
I think
the directors
in previous ARIs I've been involved in, or smaller, less long-lasting ARIs, it's more common, but more for, I think, curating than a solo show, for instance. Like, I don't think any of us would propose it here and now to have a curated show with ourselves in it, but in other ARIs I've been involved with or looked at, it's not frowned upon. It's not like we officially frown upon something.
No, but it's also the nature of what First Draft is and where it positions itself inside the community. Obviously, despite... Yeah, I think it's kind of written into the Constitution that can't happen.
I don't think it is, because I think it's happened in the past, but I think that because of our funding and stuff like that,
it's just a bit... It's just a big no-no. But First Draft is that sort of stepping stone for a lot of artists as well. We're positioned as a sort of place for emerging or experimental artists. So often, for instance, my show last year was my first solo show, and it happened here. And I think for a lot of people, that is the sort of case. So to be a director and then to sort of start putting out your own work kind of defeats the purpose of what the place is for.
But nevertheless, that offer is there when you're a director. When you leave after your 2 years, you can have a show. And what proportion of people take that up, roughly?
So we sometimes have to... Well, this year we had to force a few people to take their show.
Because we knew they'd be good.
Yeah.
But it's still put as a proposal to the board as well.
Yeah,
so
it's not just a given.
It's not just a given. So
Yeah, they still have to... But those things fall outside the normal programming period. So they can give us a proposal and we'll consider it in the next round of applications. But
yeah, it's probably been about half in the past, but I think as things got more onerous, people are much more forthcoming in wanting their show.
And it's funny because by the time you leave First Draft, you kind of, as a director, I think all of us would be by the end have left this sort of level of things. Well, to a certain degree.
That's a whole different argument about whether an ARI is a stepping stone, and it's something that came up in a talk here, and Soda Jerk, that was the Art Month talk, it was, I can't remember the other people, it was before I was a director, but they were talking about ARIs just being this little stepping stone that you use on your way to bigger and better things. And happily, one of the girls from Soda Jerk, I'm sorry, I can't remember which one, said actually it's not just about stepping stones, it's about a very particular, unique and exciting language that happens in not only in ARIs but particularly in ARIs, and it's not just about being emerging, because it comes back to being experimental or part of that do-it-yourself kind of
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you know,
But-
I would definitely agree with that sentiment. But you know, in terms of other ARIs in Sydney and taking MOP for an example, they don't position themselves as an emerging artist place, and therefore they don't have to fit constitutionally with a criteria that means that they're either emerging or experimental. So in that case, I would say First Draft is a stepping stone by nature of what it positions itself to be, which is either emerging or experimental. More the
Yeah.
emerging aspect than the experimental bit.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, that's a thing in programming that comes up for me, like as a tension in between whether we take a chance on emerging things in the spirit of what First Draft is meant to be about or now. We recently renovated this space, so the space is, we think it's quite nice. A lot
Shit
of artists. I mean, like, it's a really, really nice gallery to show in the centre of the city. We take no commission from artists and we charge as little rent as we can. And so more higher calibre artists want to show with us, and it's balancing that in programming, whether we want to take a risk on someone that has a first show and we don't really know what it's going to be, but in the spirit of what we're about, program that, or kind of try and
We always look at their images though and go, well, that's what we have to judge them on.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course, but it is about taking a chance on
And
people's ideas where you have no idea if you're going to be able, they're going to be able to pull them
sessions
off.
that I've been at, we've loved those ones. We're like, oh, give it a go. And
Yeah.
I must say that, and I don't know if just the art's changing or if it's because our gallery does. Like, the gallery it's a beautiful structure, it looks great, but I feel like we have less shows that you walk in and out of so quickly that maybe you do at other ARIs, there's less, it's not less risk, it's just, it seems to be pulled off more here, and it could just, again, not that I don't know what it is.
It's because we have a standing here and that people don't want to show bad stuff here because people see it.
Yeah.
And we have a certain
Or it's
standing
just
in the
our
community.
amazing
Well, you know, we have
programming skills.
yeah,
or
but it's
something.
just, it's not, but I, for instance, made sure that I'm just speaking as the perspective of an artist, that I made sure that this was going to be as good as I could possibly make it. And
also, I guess
like, for instance, taking 2 spaces and whatnot, because I didn't want this show to just, because it's First Draft.
And maybe it also just means on those ones where we're like, yes, let's just give it a go, not because the documentation is perfect, but we think it could work. They have worked.
Yeah, definitely.
So, as directors, why do you do it? I mean, it's quite a lot of work. You're practicing artists. You're not being paid for doing the role of director. Why do you take it on board? I mean, maybe you could all have a go at responding to that.
I cry myself to sleep every night thinking about that.
I think a large part of it is what I was saying before about not it being a stepping stone, but being a particular and dynamic environment that I continue. Like, I'm not beyond an emerging stage as an artist, and unfortunately, unlike Dara, I don't think by the end of my directorship I won't be. But I do find that ARIs are the place that I am most interested in seeing arts, and I just find it a really special kind of exhibiting platform.
So you're committed to the concept, if you like. You
Yeah,
want to support
absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
Georgie?
I mean, there's that. ARIs are really important, an important space, but I'm not particularly a visual artist, and I came from a background in performance, which with a kind of more of a theatre focus, and I was very interested in becoming involved in the visual arts, and involved in a scene that pretty much when I was coming out of university was very there are art school kind of cliques, and in Sydney can be quite cliquey, so it was kind of a way of becoming involved in the community for me, and also about just professional development and skills development, to be really talking grant application speak. But it's kind of amazing that there are 8 of us that run this really, really important space in Sydney and give heaps of artists their first shows or allow a really amazing artist to do things that they'd never be able to do at their commercial gallery. And it's a whole lot of work, but then I've met so many people and I've learnt so much, and I feel like you get out a lot in terms of a warm, fuzzy feeling. But like more than that, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think I think definitely like Georgie was saying, it's the engagement and the people, the community involved in this sort of thing, the people that you meet, and it's more so with an ARI that exists in a place like this, as opposed to commercial spaces. You do get to engage with people a lot more. You do get to engage with the work a lot more, and it's changing so much, and that's something that's really exciting for me as an artist, to be able to just walk into a space and engage with work and get excited about work. And I've always found that the place to do that is in an ARI, and you talk to people all the time, and you're consistently doing that, and then that sort of, you feed off that as well. So I think that's what I get out of it. So, and it goes back into your own work and just constantly evolves. So
I wish all of the directors had been here for this. This is great.
Apart from your sleepless nights, Dara, wondering why, do you have anything to add to what?
Well, I was just thinking, like, listening, obviously, what everyone said is what I genuinely think, but I'm now just casting my mind back to what I was thinking about before I applied, and whether that's still the same. And I think it's still largely the same, was that I always thought, and I still honestly think, that I am the type of artist who will always be supported by an ARI more so than any other type of space, at least in this country or the wider world, that's sort of similar sort of spaces in terms of not being very commercially viable or whatever that sort of thing is. So for me, when I decided to become a director, it was the idea of understanding the way that these spaces work in terms of, and then becoming involved to understand that. So if I could understand the way that the ARI system worked, then I could then, hopefully have a better understanding of how my own artistic experience will also evolve.
Well, that's really interesting, because that's in a way the next question I wanted to ask, was how you see, or if you see, your role as directors of First Draft as being separate from your artistic practice, or something somehow intertwined, or that feeds back in the way that Dara has just kind of talked about that. I mean, is it in your mind separate, or is it part of a wider practice which is about a certain form of engagement in cultural exchange? Or
it's kind of both.
I think so too. Yeah.
For me, I think for everyone, something that we say when we're interviewing for new directors and things is that your practice will likely suffer from you taking on this position. You will have less time in the studio. You are not able to go away on a 3-month residency. There are compromises that you'll need to make. But for myself, who tries to define my practice as a curator and an artist and whatever else, not as separate entities, there's an intertwining conceptually, but it doesn't feel like that most of the time.
I mean, maybe it could be one of those things that you have to come out of it. I mean, it is a 2-year block, which I think is genius. I think you're absolutely right, Georgie, from my observation, that it is what the success of it is and the longevity of it is. Because people, no matter how long and painful it seems and how many sleepless nights you have sometimes, you know that it will end in less than 24 months' time.
At the same time, I think 2 years is a decent commitment. Absolutely. And knowing that from like as soon as you go into the interview, I think it does change how you approach directorship or even applying to directorship.
It's the longest full-time job I've ever had, and I'm only a year into it. Seriously.
Because I was going to say it's sort of long enough that you can't really sit back and just write it out without and just sort of fade into the background. But it's not that long as well. 2 years is actually quite short. So
I think you would know better. Sorry, Julia.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so it is actually a really good engagement time too.
Yeah, and also the directors changing halfway through. I think naturally you're quite tired at the end of the year, but then you're like, got to step up because, and again at the end of the year, because it's going to, like, the dynamics changing again. So again, I think that's why it's such a successful kind of way of doing it.
Yeah, because because I'm in my second year of being a director at the moment, so coming up towards the end, and the dynamic in the first year, there's a very, like, lots of different ways of working and a completely different dynamic and way of thinking about the space that would happen on a every day or every week level than does now. And I think that constant refreshal and change is what keeps the energy in the space and the energy in the organisation and within the broader community.
One question I had, it's kind of purposely a bit of a provocative question, I suppose. So the First Draft, from reading on your website, was set up because there was a dearth of provision for emerging artists in the Sydney art scene. There was nowhere for those artists recently out of college or recently making work to show and experience having a show, some of what you discussed already. So would it be the ultimate aim of First Draft as an artist-run initiative to be no longer needed because that provision was made elsewhere? Or do you think that out of that provision that was initially, the kind of the initial hole, if you like, that First Draft was set up to answer, something other than that has been created? What I'm trying to ascertain is the fact that you are artist directors, that it is an artist-run initiative, not just a necessity, but something that provides something different or more useful than if it was run, say, by professional arts managers.
I think while it came out of necessity, and that's how come it's so exciting a lot of the time, I'm talking more about the whole ARI idea rather than specifically First Draft. It's now so ingrained into being, again, exactly what myself and Dara mentioned before about being this particular area of really interesting artwork, and now I cannot imagine an arts community, national or international, operating without this particular span of networks. And I think it would be tragic if something else did take that on, or if there was no need for it.
I don't think it's not about a lack of need for artist-run spaces, because since First Draft has started, there have been a whole bunch of other artist-run initiatives and spaces and projects without space that all have their different operating models and different ideologies and goals. But I think the thing that First Draft has kind of taken up is a sense of it will be there. Like, First Draft has a consistency now.
Yeah, but not only that.
I think that is now what separates us from a lot of other projects that are really amazing.
Say the word institutional.
No.
No, I think that is an interesting thing, because I remember you saying that at an artist talk here about First Draft struggling with how institutionalised it's become through the necessity of our renovations a couple of years ago, where it was fix the building or close down, and amazingly the directors rose to, and the community, like, such a massive challenge, and produce this, which is such a different model, like, to walk into is such a different thing to the original First Draft. And it is a struggle because it's such a different idea. I think we're so like schmick now. It's so, this gallery
and that's
amazing.
The thing. And I think First Draft, like, I love that idea that, you know, going back through First Draft's history, that what it was originally intended for and whether or not it needs to exist anymore, whether we've ticked that box. I think First Draft, in terms of the ARI system in Australia, has always been the place that has been a model for other ARIs in terms of the way it works, and it's always pushing this idea of what an ARI can do further and further, sort of dispelling the sort of myth that, you know, people who work in ARIs stop shaving their armpits and are all about radicalness and whatnot, that, in fact we can approach the system in a way that larger institutions actually approach it as well. But we're in a very unique position because we are artists and we understand what artists like us need, and therefore are able to push the model of an ARI further and further forward to encompass more and more people and more needs in the community, and be able to react to that change quite quickly as well.
And that us as this particular ARI do plan to stay around, whereas other ARIs, it's wonderful that they do close after 2 years. Like, it's part of what's so exciting about it, and that different models are coming along, like Deaf Be Kind as a curatorial ARI that runs off one premise for a certain number of exhibitions with a very designated timeline, rather than other ARIs that stop because their lease ran out or someone moved overseas. Like, there's so many different...
Or for instance, people borrowing our model of the 2-year thing. Safari being one. It's an event that's the fringe Biennale to the Sydney Biennale. And they've taken on our model as well, where 2 curators, they'll swap out each time, so an old one and a new one, and they keep swapping, and it's proven since it started in 2004 to be a model that is working really well for them.
Yeah, and likewise with the This Is Not Art Festival up in Newcastle, which is an umbrella for a bunch of different artist-run festivals that happens annually. They have a similar system of handing over knowledge over a rotating directorship.
Final question then. This is all about artists as leaders. Do you think of yourself as leaders?
Not necessarily as a leader, but I think artists' role is to push things. And whether or not that means leading or not, I think it's just the idea that, artists are generally those people within society that are conquering the new in a way, and then that sort of trickling down to the rest of society, at least forging the changing of attitudes and whatnot towards itself and the wider world as well.
I think there's something to be said for being a director at First Draft. It's more like this sense of collective leadership rather than any individual thing, because there are always plans that have been set in place by people before you, and there are always things that you have to do, or that there are plans for in the future, and so as much as you can make your individual mark, but in terms of a leadership position, it's very much almost being part of this alumni. And
for better or worse.
It's really a lot of upholding rather than leading. I think with a 25-year history and I feel such an important part of the Sydney art community, there's such a lot of responsibility that I feel much less like a leader than
we're desperately trying to not let the ship sink.
That's our term. Don't drop the ball. Yeah.
Julie, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say I almost feel like it's the artists and everyone that comes in to work with us. It is working with one another rather than we as a board of directors working and the artists coming in, and we're sort of leaders, so to speak, but we're all on the same level, and obviously we're all artists as well, so we are actually all on the same level, and we get just as much out of them coming in and dealing with each other as any one of us here.
Maybe the true leader in this is in fact First Draft itself.
Yeah.
And also First Draft's ability to, if there is leading, it's listening back to the community and not being directors being leaders or individuals being leaders, but that the institution of First Draft keeps this idea and responds to changing artist requirements.
I don't think it ever in its history could ever be criticised for being out of date or not responding to community.
It's responsive.
It's there, and a lot of other institutions can grow tired. And people complain about that type of thing. But because of the whole structure from top down, it is something that is always reactive to its environment.
something that Lionel wrote in a business plan, which is so business plan speak, but I think it's actually really good, is that First Draft is an organisation driven by its main stakeholders. And I think that that's like kind of like the essence of like, I don't know, it's just a way of saying it, but it's very true, and sort of becomes First Draft as an entity is kind of much bigger than any of us that are directing it at one time.
It's very communist.
Well, on that note, Dara Gill, Julie Burke, Georgie Meagher and Catherine Connolly, thanks very much.
Thank you.